Welcome to Flipside, the true story of Bob Crane. This podcast features Bob Crane's official biographers, Carol Ford, Linda Groundwater, and Dee Young, who present the Hogan's Hero star's entire life story based on their book, Bob Crane, The Definitive Biography. In this episode, Carol and Linda discuss the origins of Bob Crane's biography, their initial motivation to learn the truth about Bob, reactions to the project from those who contributed, and some of Linda and Carol's more memorable moments during the research process. We now invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy. This is The Flipside, the true story of Bob Crane.
Hi, this is Carol Ford, the author of Bob Crane, The Definitive Biography, and I'm here with Linda Groundwater remotely because we are, first off, separated by a continent, and also remotely because, of course, we are in the middle of a pandemic. So Linda is in Brisbane, Australia. I'm in New Jersey, and today is March 21st, 2020.
No, it's not.
So anyway, so I'm with Linda. Today is the 21st for me. It is not the 21st for Linda. What day is it, Linda?
It's the 22nd.
Ah, okay.
It's morning. 8 o'clock in the morning is morning.
And Linda is one of two co-authors on the book with me. Linda and Dee Young, who is in Connecticut, and actually Dee is in Florida right now and probably won't get back to Connecticut if things keep going the way that they're going, at least on the East Coast anyway. We haven't done a podcast episode in a while. We've been a little bit busy. Both Linda and I have had some things going on in our families, some health things and whatnot, and then some work things. And then, of course, all of this hit about 2 weeks ago where things really started heating up with the coronavirus. We hope that you are all okay and safe wherever you are in the world. We're thinking about you. And now's a good time to get going and recording some of the episodes that we want to do that are a little less produced and a little bit more casual, where we just kind of talk to you about, who Bob Crane was, how we got into this, what it means to us to be his official biographers. We've had people ask us, what does it mean to be an official biographer? And there's a lot of answers to all of that. We just want to kind of start with just a couple of broad questions right now. But as we go on with episodes into the future, we will get a little bit more specific. So, Linda, I will let you go first. Talk to me about why Bob Crane. We get this question a lot.
We do.
What was it that really, people will say to me, and I'm sure that I know they say it to you and to Dee, what was it that drove you to say, I'm going to research this man's life for a biography?
Because it certainly took up a lot of our lives after it began. Mm-hmm. And I think it wasn't that I chose Bob Crane. It was more that Bob Crane chose me. And I say that because I had no intention of writing a biography. I had no intention of delving into Bob Crane's life. However, I was at my mother-in-law's house one day in 2003, I believe it was. And here in Australia, cable television came much later than it did in the United States. There was still a big push on, but not until much, much later did most houses have some kind of television that was not the 4 free-to-air channels that we normally have. And she had her television on, she had cable, and it flicked on to Hogan's Heroes. And I had not watched that since I was, high schooler perhaps. And let's say that was maybe 10 years earlier. Cough, cough. And I watched it and I was so joyful watching it because I remembered all these characters. And I used to watch it with my father when I was a little girl because he loved it. And I remembered that Bob had died. I didn't remember anything about it. I went home and I looked up what happened on the internet. I was horrified. But what I found was that there were these little nuggets of things that I had no idea about. There was a lot of information about the murder. I didn't know at the time, but it was around the time that autofocus came out. And that's a discussion for a whole different day, although I will touch on it briefly here. And then there were little bits, that he was a drummer, that he was a disc jockey, that he grew up in New England the way I did. And I said, wow, I didn't know these things because splashed all over the internet were pictures of his death, stories about his death, stories about scandal, those kinds of things. And I thought I would like to know more about the other side. And I really had a hard time finding those other things. And the things that I was able to extract out of the net were really interesting and really important as to the type of person that Bob was. And it really bothered me as a former journalist that I had such a hard time learning anything other than the fact that he was murdered in his sleep. And so I said, that's not fair. I want to learn more. And I think people need to know more. And so it was very sudden, and I honestly couldn't tell you why, but it was a very sudden feeling of, I must do something about this. And voila, the book was born.
I really think it's important to say, too, you mentioned that you're a journalist. It's important for people to know what our credentials are. People kind of just look at us and say, here are these three women who have written this book, who did all of this, but what made them be able to do this? And Linda, before you moved to Australia, you were working in radio journalism in New Hampshire, correct?
Correct. Yes. I had worked in New Hampshire and in Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
I am an honors graduate of Rivier, what is now Rivier University, where I studied communications and English. Journalism was something I very much wanted to do, and I ended up doing it in radio. So I spent 5 or 6 years working in different radio stations, doing their morning drive, which at the time was a very different type of thing than it is now, that the internet is around and people wake up in the morning and they turn on their phone and they go, oh, this is what happened overnight. It didn't used to be like that. People didn't have to do their own research and get their own work and their own information. We were the ones who had to do that. We were the ones who had to go and dig and go to meetings and ask the questions and do the research. And that's something I really, really enjoy doing. And so I did not pick that up when I came to Australia because radio is very different down here. And so I said, well, it's time to get back into it. And I just went straight back into it. I love interviewing people and I love learning about people and events. And so it was just time to do that. And that's immediately what I started doing. The difference was now that I had the internet to help me to reach the people that I wanted to reach. And that made all the difference to this book. And it was just very, very important to do it properly, ask the right questions, ask them the right way. And you also have a significant history in journalism / publishing, and Dee, of course, in radio.
Yes. And, and to talk about Dee for just a minute, people wonder about Dee because she's more of the quieter one of the three of us. But Dee was instrumental to the project because without Dee, Connecticut radio would have been really tough. Dee worked in radio in Connecticut at WICC, which is where Bob also had worked in the 1950s. Dee worked there from 1976 through late 2016, early 2017, and at that time she retired. But Dee had the thumb, the heartbeat of radio as far as what we needed. She had all of those wonderful connections in addition to some of the other folks that we did get to meet and get to have be a part of the book. Dee was kind of the insider on that for us, and she kind of orchestrated all of that behind the scenes in some ways. In many ways. And she also did meet Bob, and her recollections are included in Bob's biography as well. She talks about that moment when she had just started. She had only been at WICC for a couple of weeks, and Bob had come back at the end of January 1976 to help the station celebrate its 50th anniversary. And Dee was there. She was there. She saw him come in. She got to shake his hand. She remembered the smile, that broad, beautiful sunshine smile, and just completely everything that anybody would have expected Bob Crane to be when they walked into the room. He brightened it up. So Dee, between the three of us, also was instrumental, but she's not as not as talkative or chatty as we are on some of these things. Um, and I do have my I do have my honorary degree, or honors degree, I should say, not honorary, honors degree in liberal arts. Yeah, honorary in liberal arts English from what was Glassboro State College, is now Rowan University in Glassboro, New Jersey. And I currently work as a managing editor for a healthcare publishing firm, and I am director of editorial services for the company. So I have the full editing, writing, publishing experience. I also want to thank our publisher too, Michael Aloisi, because he is really without him, we wouldn't have a book at all. So he was the one that saw our vision and said, I want to help you publish the book that you want to publish. And
immensely important.
Exactly.
Immensely important, because there were
yes.
there were people that didn't want us to publish the way we wanted to publish.
Mhm.
We wanted to tell the story that we wanted to tell, not the one that they thought would be the most sensational, or would have the most scandal, or
Mhm.
would be the most out there. We wanted to tell the story as it was, and Michael was so understanding about that.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we really wanted the hardcover with the dust jacket. We kind of went back and forth on that for a little bit, but really that was the only thing. So, Mike was fantastic. His company, AM Inc. Publishing, has been fantastic. I can't say enough good things about him either, because without him, we very likely wouldn't have the book that we have, which is the book that we wanted to have Bob's complete and total life story told in a way that wasn't going to be manipulated by a publisher for profit. And that tends to happen in the publishing industry. I will say, as far as my part in it, why I got involved and how I got involved was I was a kid years ago, back in the 80s. And I remember watching Hogan's Heroes as it was on television. And, it was on my tiny little black and white 17-inch TV in my bedroom. And, it was on twice a day at 1 o'clock and 1:30 here in the Philadelphia area on Channel 17, for those of you who are in Philly, and you'll remember that. And I just remember just absolutely falling in love with the whole thing. I thought it was the greatest show ever. And it was summer vacation. And I just, I would keep a little log. I kept a little log of every episode. And because back then we didn't know what the names of the episodes were. We didn't even know that they had names. And so I would make up my own names for the episodes. And I still have all of that. I should maybe put one of those up somewhere. But, it's like, so I had all this little 15-year-old journaling going on about the episodes and what I thought of them, and a little summary of each one. And then I went to a bookstore, and I remember thinking to myself, I want to know what happened to all of these actors on this show, because I just think that they're so really neat. And I remember reading that Bob had been murdered, and I cried. I stood there in the bookstore and I cried, and I thought, this is terrible. What a terrible thing. He was murdered and the crime isn't solved. Who could have done this to Colonel Hogan? Your 15-year-old mind processes things much differently than an adult. And I kind of made a little 15-year-old vow that I was going to find a way to help him. And I don't know why, that was what it was. It wasn't like my life was lacking in any way. It was just I felt really bad. And so I started to research, and I would go to our county library here in South Jersey, and I started to go into the microfiche rooms and the microfilms, and I would be doing all of this very elementary type research of just trying to find, bits and pieces as to, what may have happened. And then time goes on, you move into college, you get different interests, start, doing different things, and you get your first job, you get married, you get divorced, all kinds of things happen. Fast forward to 2005, and I was a part of a Hogan's Heroes online Yahoo groups. And that was something that came about because of a couple of us who wanted to connect with other Hogan's Heroes fans. I had since been recently divorced. I was looking for, just kind of an out. I remembered Hogan's Heroes, loving it so much as a kid and remembering how Bob had been murdered and just kind of looking around at different things. Again, autofocus came out. I can't even begin to tell you how disappointed I was with that film, but like Linda said, that's something for another time. And I happened to see a message come across the Yahoo group chat from Linda, who said, I'm researching a book on Bob Crane for a biography. Does anybody have anything they can help me with? My first thought was good luck with that, because I knew what the mountain it was going to be to climb that mountain. That was just going to be an enormous undertaking based on everything at that point that we all knew about Bob Crane. He had so many strikes against him. It was not going to be easy. But I remember reaching out and saying, yeah, I can help. I can do that. And so that's kind of how Linda and I connected. And that was all before Facebook, all before MySpace, all before Twitter. It was just a little email back and forth group, remember? And it was, and that's where Linda and I met. And, we had both written some fan fiction for fun, and we were going back and forth about that. But our friendship kind of grew from there. And it became a driving passion in both Linda and me. And then, of course, Dee, who we connected up with along the way, to really do justice to Bob. When we were interviewing people, when we would be on these calls and we would be reaching out to some of these very prominent people, we did not know what they were going to tell us. We wanted to hear good things. We wanted to hear, Bob was a really great guy.
I wanted to hear anything.
I wanted to hear good things, but I was nervous.
So did I. I wanted to hear the truth. We just wanted the truth. Not just the truth. I think what I wanted was 3 dimensions.
Yes, because he has been a 2-dimensional character up till that point. But just going in. Yeah.
No chance to be a whole person. It was so refreshing to hear people talk about, we would get on the phone, and I remember, I'm going to hijack you here for just a second.
Go for it.
But and people who are listening, this is what we're like when we're not recording. You've got a phone as well. I remember very distinctly Gary Owens saying, now when we did these interviews, folks, sometimes it was 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning where I was, and I would I worked a normal 9-to-5 job. And of course, I'm on the other side of the world, where right now, Carol and I are 14 hours apart. So I would go to bed at 9 or 10 or whatever it was, and I would set my alarm for 1:30 or 2 or 3 or whatever time it was, an hour before the person that we were interviewing wanted to be interviewed. So some of these interviews stand out really strongly just because of the time that they were being held. And Gary Owens was one of those middle of the night interviews. And I always wanted to speak with him because he was the voice of Sesame Street. He was the voice of Laugh-In. He had that wonderful Preparation H commercial. He was just a legend on his own. And if anyone who hasn't seen it or heard it, please look up Gary Owens Preparation H on YouTube.
Yes.
And brilliant. And nice man, very nice man, God rest his soul. And I remember distinctly that he was the person who said to us, I'm not going to talk about that. Those were the exact words he used. I'm not going to talk about that. And we all knew what that meant. And I said to him at the time, that's fine. I don't want to talk about that. And he was so excited to be able to speak to someone about the Bob that he knew. And this is the way it really was for everyone. But he was the first person, I think, who very distinctly removed himself from any of that darker aspect of Bob and said, this is what I want to talk about. Nobody ever wants to talk about this. And I think about 35, 40 minutes into the conversation, because a lot of these interviews really just became conversations, and they would go on for as much as, I think our
2 to 3
longest
hours.
one, I think Arlene Martell, we spoke with 3 or 4
Great.
hours.
Yeah, that
Uh,
one.
and
Yes.
Cynthia Lynn, we spoke to for easily a good hour and a half. And,
Mhm.
it was, but about 45 minutes in, we were just talking. It just became a normal conversation. I always had a series of questions about things that I wanted to know about. None of them included that. The only time I mentioned that was, did you know about that? That's all I ever asked. But at some stage during Gary Owen's conversation, he started talking about it. He brought it up to say, you know what? I didn't know about that, and it didn't matter. This was the Bob that I knew, and this is the Bob that I was friends with. I remember them talking about that book, the book club thing, and the charity work, and it was so refreshing to hear someone just saying, you know what, I found out about this. It didn't matter. This wasn't the person that I knew. And that was our experience with almost all of these people. And it was so humbling. I felt so privileged that these people would give us the other side, because nobody ever wanted to hear that. And I think we said this even when we were talking to Ed Robertson on TV Confidential, but Larry Hovis's brother, Tom Davis, said when Bob died, the original cast was asked by all those stations if they would come on and talk about Bob. And they said, yeah, but we only want to talk about Bob, the man that we knew. And this rubbish. We want to talk about Hogan's Heroes and our friend. And no one took them up on it. Everyone wanted to talk about Scandal, and that burned people for a long time, as did Autofocus. Burned people for a long time. This book was really hard because of the timing. The circumstance and the timing both made this book really hard. It's one of the reasons I'm so proud that it's come out the way it's come out, because we worked uphill all the way.
And it's still an uphill battle. We still get people who criticize us for defending him, and how can you defend him? And we're not defending him, but we are standing up for him in place of him, because he is not here to do so himself. And that leads me to, we had to earn trust. And that may sound, kind of like frivolous, but let me tell you, it was hard. It was really, really difficult to get those first few people. And I'm talking the Hollywood people, but also the family, also so many people who had been burned by the media, by autofocus. Our really first, Linda, you had gotten in touch with Al Warren and Jim Senich, Jim being Bob's cousin, Al having worked with Bob and, just adoring Bob on WICC, and of course, Dee. But probably the first person that people would recognize with Bob, with his work on Hogan's Heroes, that we actually got, that we earned trust with, was Arlene Martell. And I can remember, her getting back to me. She called me on my cell phone. I'm driving, this is back in the days where you could talk on the phone while you were driving. And I was driving, and she actually called my cell phone, and she says, hello, is this Carol Ford? And yes, it is. And this is Arlene Martell. It's like that. This is where you almost drive off the road into a roadside, because you're like, what?
I've got one of those stories. I've got one of those stories.
And so, yeah, I know. And so, she says, I would like to talk with you, but I'm a little bit nervous to do an interview because I don't know who you are. How do I know you and Linda? Because Linda and I did most of these interviews together. She said, how do I know you and Linda are who you say you are? And she said, I would be much more comfortable if I had a contract. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I can do that, because at work we have contracts for authors and interviewers and interviewees and things like that. So I turned the car around and I run back to the office, and I go and I get one of the very simple author agreements that we had used for one of our textbooks at work, and I amended it to the interview agreement. And basically, it was just the same kind of thing. They were going to see a copy of their written words as they appeared in the book, and the sign off on it. And then we were going to give them a complimentary copy of the book, which in the end, I think we only had about It was less than 10 people actually said that they still wanted to do that. And the people who did that I received the most beautiful letter in the mail from Hogan's Heroes director, Bruce Bilson, after he received the copy of the book, who thanked me over and over for allowing him to look at the proofs, that had never been done for him before. It was just completely unheard of in the industry. And it was just so welcomed and so, something that he really appreciated, but then also how beautiful the book was. And he just praised the book up and down. And so that really touched me. But in the early stages, trying to convince Arlene that Linda and I had the credentials to do this, that our intentions were good. And that's exactly what she said to me. She said, I can't just go on your word that your intentions are good. This is how burned these people had been. And when I say burned, I mean their words really got twisted. And so we worked up this contract, and I sent her the contract, and we had a couple of preliminary phone calls, very brief, but preliminary phone calls, Arlene and me. And then we went on a conference call, Linda and Arlene and me. And by the end of it, Linda, your son Andrew was on the phone talking with her. And
he wanted to talk to Tiger, didn't he? He wanted to talk to Tiger.
So by the end, we were all friends. And the best part about it was she really, and she was the first one that actually said it, but we heard this from so many people. Once we got the interview done, people would say to us, we're in this with you. We're a part of this now. Yeah. We want to be a part of this. You keep us in the loop. You tell us how you're doing. We want to be a part of this. And it went from zero trust because they didn't know who we were to we're in it with you. It was such a hard fight to prove ourselves because, we work full time. We have families. We're not in the industry as far as Hollywood. We're not a part of the inner circle. We're just regular people doing regular jobs, doing regular things. But yet we are trying to put out this book about a person who has just been embroiled in scandal, whose murder remains unsolved. You turn on the television and every single documentary about him is something sensational and salacious, and it was an uphill battle. And one by one, once Arlene came on, that's when we got Cynthia Lynn. And then once we got Cynthia Lynn and Arlene, then we started to get the directors, Jerry London and Bruce Bilson and Robert Butler. And then it just kind of became a snowball. And then one day Linda was brushing her teeth, and who was it that called you?
Oh my, yes. I had just started a new job working for a bank. It was about 10 minutes to 8 in the morning. This was 2007 because that's when I started working for the bank. And the phone rang, and I breezed past the telephone and said, I'm not getting it because it'll be Kane. And Kane was my son's school friend. And I said, he'll want to know what the homework was last night because he calls every other day wondering what the homework was last night. And I'm busy, so somebody else can pick up the phone. And so I went into the bathroom to brush my teeth, and my husband apparently got out of bed and picked up the phone because he didn't work in the morning. And he came into the bathroom holding the phone. And I'm standing here with my toothbrush shoved firmly in my face. He holds the phone out to me and says, Al Ruddy? And he said, what? And he said, Al Ruddy? And I said, well, what about Al Ruddy? And he said, he's on the phone. And I spat out my Colgate and I rinsed my face and I said, what? He said, he wants to talk to you. And I said, do you know who that is? And he said, no. Really sad for someone who one of his favorite movies is The Godfather, but okay. I said, okay. I said, give me a sec. So I got on the phone, and it was actually Al Ruddy's secretary. And she said, just hold on for Mr. Ruddy. And I said, what? And so he got on the phone and he said, this is Al. And he said, I got your email. And the Al Ruddy story is that I actually emailed Al Ruddy originally and said, I would like to speak with you about Bob Crane. And he emailed back, and I gave him a little idea of what, the book was about. And he emailed back and said, thank you very much. But no, actually his secretary emailed back, and said, thank you very much. But no, Mr. Ruddy says he didn't really know Bob that well and doesn't think he'd be able to be of help. And I said, oh, okay. So I emailed back and I said, thank you very much for responding. I appreciate it. I really wanted to speak to Mr. Ruddy more about the creation of Hogan's Heroes as a show and whether Bob really epitomized what he was looking at, what his vision was. And, thank you very much. And I appreciate your time. And I thought that was the end of it until the phone rang. It was a highlight of the interviewing process for me because it was spontaneous and it was refreshing and it was funny. And sometimes it was a little off color and it was just joyful. It was just joyful. And when we talked about the people that we got, Arlene was that advocate for us. When we were talking about how we were gathering people, once we had Al Ruddy, Al was someone who then we were able to get other people because we would send people a list of who we had. You remember how that list got longer and longer?
It got longer
put this person on. People will know who this is, and this person will know who that is, and these people will know who that is. Make this list. And so as time went on, the list got longer, and Al certainly helped add a bit of strength to that list. But our very first advocate, and she was very strong in our favor, was Arlene Martell. She got to the point, and I recall this, God rest her soul, I loved this woman. She went to Robert Clary, and Robert Clary said no to me originally, and then he said no to me a year later. I just kept trying him. And then he said no to me another time.
And
then we got Arlene.
But he said no to
Arlene.
Yeah.
She went to Robert Clary and she said, hey, I believe in what these girls are doing. And I still believe that even though Robert Clary still said no at that point, that years later, when I tried him again, he came back and he sent us a beautiful letter. He didn't want to talk on the phone, but he sent us a letter. And I do believe that one of the reasons that he came was because she had said yes. I do believe that if she had not gone to him originally and said, hey, I've spoken with these girls. I want to talk to you about doing this, even though he said no to her, even though he said no to us, the longer that list got, that it was okay. She helped. And we had a lot of people who just by their trusting us and us being able to add their name to the list, that became the step for the next lot of all these people are in. It must be okay because I don't trust these people, but they trust these people. I don't trust Carol and Linda and Dee because I don't know them from Adam, but I trust Al and Arlene and Bruce Bilson and Jerry London. I trust those people. And if they're trusting Carol and Linda and Dee, then I'll give them a shot. And that's why they would get on the phone with us and still do well, I'm not going to talk about that. They all started very defensive about that. I'm not going to talk about that. Okay. And then they got to know us through the conversation. Even though Robert Clary said no originally, he eventually trusted us because other people trusted us. And he was honest with us and he was willing to give us that small bit that really for me just helped bring this to a peak, I think. And it was just an example of how one person fed the next. And that's how this whole thing came together. It just organically grew. And I was just so thrilled with that.
Each person, whether they were famous, whether they were from his family, whether they were his coworkers, whether they were his friends from Stanford High School, who I just absolutely adore, and we will get to them in another episode. But each person brought a layer to his life that had never been explored before. And that is why when people say, why should I listen to your boy? It's because we are presenting him in the most complete way that that anybody could have possibly presented him, save himself. And, Bob, and I'll say this really quickly, then we're going to get to one question that we had from one of our Hogan's Heroes Facebook groups that we belong to. He was a writer. Bob Crane was a writer, and he wanted to write his own book. And a week before he died, he gave an interview in Scottsdale, Arizona, with a reporter reporting for a local newspaper. And he said, if I ever write my own autobiography, I'm going to title it Laughing All the Way to the Grave. And that's the last chapter of the book. We called the last chapter of the book Laughing All the Way to the Grave because it's the chapter that sums up who Bob Crane was, what was his legacy. Bob isn't here to write his own autobiography. When you write a biography about somebody, especially somebody who isn't here, who can't corroborate things, you have to talk to as many people as you can. Some people might think that we talked to too many people. I don't think you can talk to too many people. I think that it has to be done in a way, a very human approach, but also a scientific approach. Because if you only have 3 people saying he was a great guy, then all you have is 3 people. Or if all you ever have are the 10 people or whatever who are saying, oh, he was a jerk and he was a this and he was a that. But then you're leaving out the other, 200 or 300 people who knew him. And you're just focusing on, maybe a handful of people who didn't really know him, but they're the loudest voices in the room. Then that's not a true representation. And so what we did was both a human and scientific approach to get as much data as we could about him from as many people who knew him better than most. And we're not going to sit here and say that we knew him because we didn't know him, but we do know him based on the testimonials, based on the recollections, based on the testimonies of those who were very close to him, who knew him from way back to his very early days as an elementary school kid to, very young kid, all the way through right up until the night he died. So yes, we do know him based on more than 200 people told us who knew him very, very, very well. That is important. That's important to realize. We represent their words and we represent him based on their words. And that's a heavy burden. You can't take that lightly. And we're humbled by it. We are honored by it. But most importantly, it's a responsibility. When we see or hear somebody say, I saw that movie and now I know who he was and he's such a jerk. No, you don't know who he was. That movie, I'm going to say this really quickly, then we'll wrap this episode up. Linda and I can talk a lot. Can you tell?
Hey, I will say though, Carol, too, just on what you've said.
Yeah.
We spoke to anybody who wanted to speak to us.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't weed out people who might say bad things.
Correct.
We didn't weed out people who might only have one sentence to say, or how relevant is that? Or we've spoken to enough people about Hogan's Heroes, or enough people about school, or enough people about. We spoke to anyone who wanted to come forth and say anything. So we gave more than 200 people the opportunity to say that Bob Crane was a jerk.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We gave more than 200 people the chance to say, I knew all about these things about Bob, and he was a horrible person, and all of these things you're hearing are incorrect. We let anybody tell us anything that they wanted to say. At the end of every interview, I would say to people, is there anything else you want us to know? Is there anything else that you want to say? And no one did any different than what we've revealed. Everything. We didn't hide bad things. If someone had a bad thing to say, it's in there. Stuart Moss was not particularly kind in what he had to say. We put it in the book.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? He was a minority, but he's in there because he said it.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not hiding anything. So what we have put in is what we got. So if 200 people who knew Bob tell us these things, that's what we're going to tell you. In the book, in the beginning of the book, there are pages of people saying good things about Bob and good things about the book. And we put that in there, not just because it makes us look good, or actually not at all because it makes us look good, but because it's telling readers what these people felt when they were giving us their stories, how they felt unable to tell their stories before, and so therefore how good they felt being able to talk now, the way they wanted to talk, good or bad. This gave them their chance to tell the story the way they knew it, their part of it, their little chapter in his story. And that is why those things are there. And that's why it's important to understand and read those, even though it sounds like a bunch of, oh, look, wasn't this wonderful? It isn't. It's about people being able to tell the story that they know, often for the first time.
Mm-hmm. It's exactly right. And a lot of times these people, and I shouldn't say these people that were connected to Bob, they either didn't want to talk to the media for fear of being caught up in and embroiled in the scandal, or when they did talk to them, they did not, as I had said before, they were often misrepresented. When you look at all the different layers of Bob's life, it's like Shrek, everybody's an onion. Well, it's true. You can't just look at Bob Crane and see him as three things. And this is for another episode. But right now, what people see is that he is a murder victim. He is the subject of scandal. He's caught up in a sexual scandal. Oh, and he's Hogan's heroes. He's Colonel Hogan. And so those are the things it's the three things. It's Hogan, sex, and murder. And those are the things that people just gravitate to. I understand that, an unsolved crime is something that is very, people are drawn to that. They're curious. They like to be the armchair detective. But there is so much more. And that's the piece that Linda and Dee and I, we get very passionate about. And we want people to know. We want you to be able to watch Hogan's Heroes and go, you know what? He was a human being. He was he wasn't perfect, but he wasn't this monster that he's been made out to be. And so that's what part of what we do is we make sure that you see the full story of Bob. You learn the full story of Bob. We're going to wrap up this episode. Like I said, we've been taking some questions from some fans. Eventually. That's all right. Hey, people are looking for things to do right now. This is good.
They got nothing on at the moment. They might as well be listening to the Laurel and Hardy show here.
So we've got a couple of questions. We're going to go through some of these, and we're going to, take questions all the way through some of these episodes that we do that are more casual. Andrew Fabro on the Hogan's Heroes Facebook group that we belong to has asked, did Bob Crane really play drums on the Hogan's Heroes theme that is played at the start and end of each episode? And Linda, go ahead with that.
Oh, well, the answer is very simple. Yes, he absolutely did. And Bob, if you don't know much about Bob, and certainly one of the things that I picked up that made me want to learn more about him when I first researched was that Bob was a drummer. He was a very good drummer. His dream was originally to be a professional drummer with a big swing band or the CBS studio band, and he was a musician at heart. There were drums on set all the time in his dressing room. If you wanted to know where Bob was, you just listened for the drums. And yes, he absolutely did. Bob loved playing drums till the day he died. He would have probably looked at himself as a musician and then an actor. Yes.
Correct. Yes. He played the drums throughout Hogan's Heroes, even the ancillary music that you hear in the series as well. The drums went everywhere with him. The drums were with him in radio. We'll do a whole lot of that later on. But everywhere he went, it was his drums, always the drums. So yes, the answer, as Linda said, the answer to that is yes. So I guess we're going to wrap this up now. Linda, what do you think? It's getting dark here.
Well, for now, it's getting time to have a hot cross bun for Brecky. My dog is staring at me as though she would like to have some, and she will not. And so, look, if anybody who wants to know anything, please ask the question to message Carol or me via Facebook or Twitter or wherever you can find us. I know I'm on Facebook and I'm on Hogan's Heroes groups. We are happy to tell people about who this man was. We are not happy to discuss minute details of his murder. And the reason for that is this book was never about his death. It was about his life. So if you want to know anything about his life, if we know it, we will share it. We will not force you to buy the book in order to do it. We recommend the book strongly, not because we're making any money from it, because we are not, by the way, and Carol will be able to explain that, but because we want the truth out there. And if we can help you by telling you anything, we will. So please, please ask anything. And thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, and just to follow that up, you can go to our website. It is voteforbobcrane.org. That's vote, the number 4, bobcrane.org. Go over there. You'll find YouTube videos. You'll find a blog. You'll find this podcast archived. You'll find all kinds of things over on our website that will help you understand who Bob Crane really was. But that being said, we're going to sign off. Thank you so much for joining us. Be safe out there, everyone. Goodbye, everyone. We'll talk to you next time. Bye now.
Enjoy. God bless. Take care.
Flipside, The True Story of Bob Crane is owned and produced by Carol M. Ford Productions and is based on Bob Crane, the definitive biography. All rights reserved, no portion of the podcast may be used without written permission. For archived episodes of this podcast and more information about Bob Crane, visit votefobobcrane.org. That's vote, the number 4, bobcrane.org. You can also subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, our hosting site Speaker, and everywhere good podcasts are available.